So, welcome everybody. Boa tarde a todos. Obrigado. This morning we heard about the challenges facing us as we move forward towards sustainable development. The question we ask ourselves this afternoon is, how can business help drive this? What part can business play in the SDGs, in the negotiation process, in delivery, and in people's livelihoods? This afternoon we're going to focus on corporations. We're going to explore corporate business models that embrace sustainable development and deliver it. We're going to look at effective models that exist today and that are very sorely needed in the future if corporations aren't to lead us into exceeding planetary boundaries and social boundaries. And we're going to do this in the context of this series of global sustainable development summits that we've had from Rio, that each of which has emphasized one dimension of the complex sustainable development agenda. In '92, in Rio, we talked sustainable development, but we focused on environmental conventions. In Johannesburg in 2002, we talked about sustainable development, but we focused on the social, the poverty side. And now in Rio in 2012, we're beginning to finally address the economic governance, as Akim reminded us, the economic governance to achieve sustainable development. The politics in 1992 were not very conducive to economic interests, but Rio Plus 20, I think, is a response to growing concerns to shape new economic models. Green economy, green growth, inclusive green growth, or at least to talk about the basic economic enabling conditions for our principal economic agents to recognize that the economy is rooted in environment and to directly achieve social and environmental goals with all economic activity. Now, corporations are the big beasts amongst these economic actors. So we think in IIED that we won't have better economic models without better corporate business models. The prevailing economy and the types of corporations we have are intimately tied together and they're actually tied right into our culture, shaping our aspirations, expectations and our livelihoods, sometimes distorting them maybe. So IIED felt it was the right time to bring together leading figures in the corporate world to tell us how their business models have evolved to address sustainable development and what more is needed. We're going to discuss what it takes for businesses to move from the edge of the sustainable development stage to the center, with sustainable development at the heart of their business models. So how are we going to run the next 90 minutes? We're going to hear insights from corporate leaders in consumer products and in mining. We're going to enrich this with perspectives from a major social enterprise from India, which will tell us, I think, about generating real value through enterprise. Unfortunately, we were going to have somebody from the sharp end of retail helping through Walmart to sell flowers generated through smallholders in Africa, but we have a technical problem, so I'm afraid that Kathleen cannot join us. That's a shame. But what we will do is we will begin by hearing about some new research that looks at the fundamental purpose and drivers of tomorrow's successful corporations. This is the Corporation 2020 vision you're going to hear about. And then it's going to be followed by three briefer introductions from each of the other panel members, and then we'll move into a discussion. I might ask one question, but I would like for this afternoon's session to have questions from the floor to our panels, or thoughts from the floor, and indeed the panel can talk to one another. We're up here sort of on the edge of a cliff, but we like to think we're in lovely, big, comfortable chairs around a fireside talking, so let's try and do that. So, I'd like to move into introducing our first speaker, Pavan Sukhdev. Pavan's been with Deutsche Bank. He directed the TEEB program you heard about this morning, the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity. He's the founder and chief executive of Green Initiatives for a Smart Tomorrow in India. And he's the main author of Corporation 2020, exploring the very shape, the very DNA of the corporation. So Pavan, over to you. Please help us frame our discussion.
Thank you, Steve, and welcome all of you. I think it's my challenge to create is it the warm glow that you said of the fireplace, by making use of some combination of the warm heat of Rio and perhaps of the economic heat of today's economy and its main driver, which is the corporation. So I want to present to you some thoughts that a team of researchers and myself have been evolving at Yale University for the last year and a half, and which are now in the shape of a campaign called Corporation 2020. The basic question that we are trying to address is, can today's corporation deliver tomorrow's economy? And the basic realization we have is that this isn't happening, and this is not going to happen unless we see change. And why is this important? Well, it's important because the private sector today is something like 60% of global GDP. It is responsible for and provides something like 70% of the total jobs in the world. And its taxes pay for a large fraction of the fiscal deficit. So if you think in terms of the impact of the private sector, it's huge. But not only that, its influence on the political world is huge, for the simple reason that the three most important items on the report card of today's politician, which is GDP growth, employment, high employment, and fiscal gap management, they are pretty much determined by the way that corporations work. And this is why we have this challenge of how do we get away from the negative impacts of lobbying and so on. So to me, these are the challenges, and these are the reasons why we have to be focused on this. Sorry, where should I point this wonderful instrument to? Oh, there. Okay.
You're pointing the wrong way.
Oh, okay. Right. There we are. So I'm pointing towards Corporation 1920. I think that's what it was. I think part of the challenge that we have in today's corporation is what it's like. And here's a little bit of information research based on the top corporations. You can see that the number of companies which had a turnover greater than 25 billion or 50 billion or even 100 billion has been increasing dramatically decade after decade from the 1970s. The number which exceeded $20 billion was 25 billion was less than 20 in 1970, but has gone up to something like 350. And of course, that hides the fact that the economy overall is growing, and you can work that out by saying how many corporations' turnovers are in excess of 0.1% of GDP. And that answer also has been growing up dramatically from just about 20 in 1973 to more than 120 today. So the pursuit of size is clearly one of the features of the corporation. And another feature is the significance of the financial sector, and significance not just, as you see, in terms of creating the powder, the financial powder, which allows companies to invest and allows them to perform and succeed and deliver, but also the bonuses that financiers earn. And how recent this phenomenon is can be seen from this chart, which goes back several decades. In fact, it was really only in the late 70s and early 80s that you saw average earnings in the United States decouple, if you like, between industry generally and the financial sector. And that was largely being driven by the bonuses in the financial sector. It was following different laws, different rules. Another aspect which feeds this corporate cycle is trade, because today's successful model is the multinational corporation. And it is an arbitrager of resources. It will get resources cheapest from wherever it does, usually poorly governed developing countries and Australia. More of that later, yes. It will get human capital from wherever it's available in plenty and plenty of supply, which is usually Asian developing countries. It will get rich, opportune markets from wherever it wants, which could be USA, Europe, Japan. And it arbitrages all of these aspects and does so by means of the flow of trade and the flow of capital. The flow of capital is relatively easy. But look how much trade has been increasing during this period, where if we measure the total world trade, it has gone up from under 5% in 1975 to over 30% of GDP in 2010. And that's huge. That gives you a sense of what the footprint of corporations, of the successful corporations would be, because trade, more trade means more transportation, and therefore there is an impact on the footprint. If I were to look at today's key features in the corporation, we are talking about the pursuit of size. Dominance and size go together. We are talking about the extensive use of lobbying, so that all of the advantages that are favoring your performance, are keeping competition away from you, are maintained, and new opportunities obtained. It's advertising, and relentless advertising. I mean, the manner in which we get bombarded by advertising, which converts our human insecurities into wants, the wants into needs, the needs into demand, and the demand through production into supply. That's what's driving the economy. And finally, leverage. There are really no limits to leverage. Today, as a private sector enterprise, I can borrow, issue bonds, issue commercial paper, do whatever I want, and some hedge fund manager who is smart, or some money manager who is smart, is the conscience keeper of society on how much is borrowing, because my bankers don't know. They'll only find out when they total up the annual P&L. And in any case, I don't tell one banker what I've borrowed from another. Why should I? There are no rules forcing me to do so. We don't have consortium regulation around the world. So these are the features that define today's corporation, and as a result of that, and supporting that is the sheer size of externalities. The cost to society of doing business as usual has just been growing and growing and growing. And this is costs in terms of all of the dimensions which are relevant for sustainable development. These are social costs, these are costs to human health, these are costs to nature. And when we measure these impacts, a recent study of the top 3,000 corporations found that they were huge. We were talking about costs for the top 3,000 companies of $2.1 trillion. That's 3.5% of global GDP. And we are, as a result of our current manner of unsustainable production, approaching planetary boundaries, not just climate, biodiversity loss, excesses in the nitrogen cycle, potential meeting of constraints in terms of supply of phosphorus, which is a key ingredient of agriculture, rock phosphorus, and severe losses in the oceans taking place, where the depletion of ocean fisheries is getting to a point where 30-40% of the fisheries are depleted. Coral reefs are dying, and this is not just about biodiversity, it's also about the 500 million people whose lives and livelihoods and protein supply comes from the fisheries of coral reefs. And yes, we have many corporate leaders, and if you log into the website, you'll find my interviews with many corporate leaders like Jochen Seitz from Puma, and Alessandro Carlucci from Natura here in Brazil, and so many others, who are trying to change and trying to create new models of success, which creates social capital, which creates natural capital. But the reality is, if I just add up mentally the total turnover of these leading corporations, and I say, okay, let's assume I've only captured 1/10 of that, I still end up with a number less than 10% of global GDP. But the point is, the economy won't change unless all corporations behave differently. And if the economy doesn't change, then we can forget the goals of sustainable development. Because if we want improved human well-being, if we want increased social equity, if we want reduced environmental risks, and if we want less ecological scarcity, we're not going to get that by having today's corporation, that is the brown economy corporation, driving a brown economy. You can't have an economy which is pointing in this direction and the goals of sustainable development in the opposite. So that brings me to my next point, which is the size of negative externalities is really about recognizing impacts on stakeholders. We have to move from a shareholder capitalist approach to a stakeholder capitalist approach, and that means looking at impacts on financial capital, human capital and natural capital across not just your shareholders but a huge range of potential beneficiaries in society. And then expectations change. If you target a corporation's design where what I call Corporation 2020 is designed so that its goals are aligned with the goals of society, where it is a capital factory, it's not just measuring financial P&L and balance sheet, it's also measuring its total impacts on natural capital, human capital and financial and social capital. Then you start thinking differently. If it creates positive externalities in terms of being a community, Natura, for instance, 1.2 million housewives earn from Natura something of the order of $900 million, which is commissions that they earn for selling the products of Natura. We are adding labor market productivity. I think you heard about that this morning as to what classical economics doesn't cover. We are adding to a earning power in the housewife, which changes the nature of the society itself. We are changing the household's consumption into more health and more education and less drinks and less waste. As it happens, women tend to spend more wisely than men. And we are also creating the opportunity that these housewives can apply to other products in earnings. So that's social capital creation. Companies can be institutes like Infosys in India, which trains 30,000 young IT engineers formally every year, of which 15% leave every year. So they carry with them that training, and that creates positive human capital outside the company. So that's a positive externality. Google is an example of a community. They've created a sort of a powerhouse of intellect and ideas by creating a sense of belonging there. I mean, you can slide down from your workplace to the canteen. You have got amazing food in the canteens. You can sit in a boat and have discussions. And of course, you can have billiards and stuff like that. That's part of building the culture of community. Institute Infosys, my God, if any of you visit Mysore, check out their campus. And I've shown you the small buildings in the campus of Infosys. The big building actually looks like Capitol Hill. So I don't need to show it to you. Just Google Capitol Hill and that's the big building. It's India's biggest building since independence. That campus houses 20,000 people at any time. 15,000 students and 5,000 teachers and support. And this is how they create human capital. They invested. They didn't over-leverage to get here. This was accrued earnings that was basically invested $500 million, $450 million of campus to create human capital for the company and for the outside society. And disclosing externalities, which you need to do, is possible. Puma has disclosed its externalities along its entire value chain. Here are the results. 90% of their cost to society come from the value chain, and they are working to change that. And Infosys has disclosed its positive human capital externalities. As some work that I have done, I have to disclose as well. And that is huge. We're talking about $1 billion+ of positive human capital creation every year from a company which earns $6 billion of net profit. But we're not there yet, because even though many leaders are demonstrating success, we need an environment that automatically engenders this response, and that's not happening. We need to change a number of things. We need to change the way we account for externalities. We need to change the way resources are taxed. Right now, too little. Tax resources more, tax profits less is what I say. We need to limit leverage. If you're too big to fail, not just a bank, but nowadays an insurance company or a car company or an airline, then you need to have your borrowing power limited. You need to set aside, just like banks set aside capital for credit losses, so should you, because finally, it's the taxpayers who are going to pay for your losses. You make profits, that's fine. When you lose money, the government bails you out, and you and I pay taxes to pay for that bailout. Brilliant. But that's not acceptable. That's not markets. And finally, advertising has to get accountable. It cannot be the case that you can sell any product that you feel like by saying anything that you feel like, and only, such as in the cases of milk food advertising in Africa or cigarette advertising generally, constraints are imposed on a case-by-case basis. And by the way, cigarette advertising limits and constraints took 60 years in the US and even longer elsewhere. We can't work like that. So these changes are required. And today we need a roadmap for these changes. Rio Plus 20 should create that. Today we need to instill these ideas across society which is meeting here. We need to create partnerships like we already have, the Tea Business Coalition, which is accounting for externalities. We need to create, I think with the Tea Business Coalition, the beauty is that the coalition has a clear purpose. It's working towards the disclosure of externalities. Richard Spencer is here in the audience. Please raise your hands. You should be bombarded with questions about what you are doing and why. And I hope you will be. And finally, you need campaigns like this one, Corporation 2020, where we have world leaders, the chairman of Walmart, the CEO of Puma, the Minister of Environment for Norway, Carlucci, the CEO of Natura, and so many others, who've gone on record about what they think is needed and what is their opinion of Corporation 2020. So when you guys have had some time to chill out and have a drink and near a laptop, open it up, please. Check this out. And I think you will enjoy what you see. And once you've seen it, hopefully you will convince your government colleagues and the negotiators to do the following four very simple things. Introduce the following words into the text that is being negotiated. Accounting for externalities. Taxation. It's not there, by the way. The word taxation, taxes doesn't exist right now in the zero draft. That's why it's zero draft, actually. So get in taxation, reform, resource taxation, or anything to do with taxation. Limits to leverage. Remind people that the last two major crises were because of misused leverage, so there must be some role for government to do something about this. And finally, accountability in advertising. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Pavan. I've been privileged to read the introduction to Pavan's book, and it really, really is a great read. It's actually a beautiful read, well read. When does it come out?
The book's actually out in September, and I request you to buy it, even though the website actually talks a lot about what's in it. But the detail is in the book, and the nice language will not be there in the website.
Thank you very much. No, it's a privilege to hear from you. Now, we're going to move over to Karen. Karen Hamilton's Vice President for Global Sustainability at Unilever. I think many of us have heard of the Unilever's Sustainable Living Plan. Looks like quite a model of strategy and ambition to produce environmental and social value with all production. Karen, what lessons from Unilever's process of re-engineering your business model?
Thank you, Steve. Yes, so as Steve said, I'm Vice President for Global Sustainability, but for most of my career, I've worked in Unilever as a marketeer, working on a variety of consumer brands. And just a couple of words about Unilever in case you don't know much about us. So we have operations in about 100 countries and we sell in 180. You'll probably have heard of some of our brands like Omo washing powder or Lifebuoy soap, Hellmann's mayonnaise or Lipton tea. And we reach 2 billion people every day with our products. 2 billion people are using our products every day. And so, like it or not, we have a considerable impact and influence on both the environment and social impacts. So I want to just cover three areas about the way in which Unilever is integrating sustainable development into the heart of our business model. First of all, why are we doing it? Then what are we doing? And an example. Then I'll finish with some of the lessons that we've learned and the challenges that we see going forward. So first of all, why? Well, of course, you've heard, if you were in the plenary sessions this morning and from Pavan now, the challenges that we all face of rising temperatures, water scarcity, worsening sanitation, particularly as people move into cities, and the need that we all have to tackle those. As a company and as a business, we are also committed to growth. We believe that economic growth is a necessary part of supporting social systems and of lifting people out of poverty. But of course, growth at any cost is not viable, given the challenges that we face. And as the WWF has said, if we were all to live the lifestyle of Europeans, we would need 3 planets and we only have 1. So business needs to be part of the solution, and at Unilever we believe that the business needs to look at the long term, to get off the treadmill, for example, of quarterly reporting, that we need to be part of society rather than separate from it. And as Pavan said, that it's as important to meet the needs of citizens and communities as it is to meet the demands of shareholders. And so one of the things that motivates us is not only the necessity of managing the risk to our business. We've been around for 100 years. We would like to be around for another 100. But also to use foresight, to use business planning, and to work with others to develop new business models, to find new ways of engaging with consumers, and as a result to open up new possibilities and new opportunities for the business in terms of growth. So what are we doing about it? Well, we've set out our approach, our plan, in what we call the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, and at the heart of it is the ambition to decouple our growth from our environmental impact while increasing the social benefits of our brands at the same time. And in order to make this tangible and concrete, we've set 3 goals that we want to achieve by 2020. The first is to help more than 1 billion people to take action to improve their health and well-being. The second is to halve the environmental footprint of our products across the life cycle. And the third is to source 100% of our agricultural raw materials sustainably. Now, I don't have time to touch on all 3 of those goals. I could talk about the way in which we are working with our Lifebuoy soap brand to educate children in particular in the right times of day to wash their hands to avoid diarrhea. I could talk about the work we're doing on sustainable agriculture and with smallholder farmers. I just want to touch instead on the second of those goals, how we want to halve the environmental footprint of our products in greenhouse gases, water and waste. And the way we've gone about this is to first of all understand our footprint. So we took 1,600 of our products in 14 different large countries and representing 70% of our sales. And we understood what their life cycle footprint was in greenhouse gases, water and waste. And this is really informing our approach because it's underpinned by fact and scientific understanding. And what we've learned is, for example, when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, that our manufacturing, our factories, offices, laboratories make up less than 5% of our greenhouse gas emissions, whereas the sourcing of raw materials is about 26%, and the way in which consumers cook, clean and wash with our products is 2/3 of our impacts, of our footprint. So we're taking responsibility across that value chain and looking to halve that footprint. One way we're doing that, this is one small example, is with our laundry products. 1 in 3 households in the world uses a Unilever laundry product. One approach that we're taking is to concentrate those large packs of washing powder and dilute liquids down into much smaller packs, less raw materials, less packaging, and to improve the performance so that they work at cold washing temperatures and give you clean clothes at the end of it. As a result of that, we have reduced the greenhouse gas emissions per washing load by 1/2 in some countries. So one approach that gives us hope, I guess, that we can do that elsewhere. So moving on now to my third point, which is what are the lessons that we've learned? Well, what we have learned is that there is a compelling case, a business case for sustainability. If we look at those of our brands that are starting to put sustainability into their propositions and into their innovations and products, they are growing faster than the rest of the company. So whereas Unilever, for example, grew well last year, Smaller Mighty concentrated laundry detergents or Lifebuoy soap grew at double digit. What we've learned is that if we want to take an approach which embraces the whole value chain, that collaboration is as important as competition. Competition in the 20th century has been the driving factor of businesses. And I believe that in the 21st century, if we want to solve some of the complex problems that face us today, that businesses, academics, NGOs and governments truly need to partner together. And we need to engage in a very cooperative way with consumers, with ordinary people to find those solutions. And that's why here in Rio, Unilever is strongly advocating the development of sustainable development goals. What we've learned from starting with our own plan is that setting tangible goals that are designed and delivered by governments, by civil society and with business, we believe will help to drive to tangible action in the way that we hope we're starting to do within Unilever with our own goals on the Sustainable Living Plan.
Excellent. Thanks, Karen. Very succinct and good news for us to hear from. can we move over to Nick? Nick Holland is Chief Executive of Goldfields, which is the 5th biggest gold company in the world, and he doesn't have samples on him, no freebies. There are many people who believe, of course, that mining is inherently unsustainable, and yet it's quite interesting how in the last 10 or so years, quite a large part of the industry has moved from head in the sand to some quite bold initiatives. And I understand that Goldfields has been tackling quite tough safety and community and environmental footprint issues. So what made you do that, and what have you done?
Thank you very much. I have to correct you, I'm afraid. The 4th largest in the world. Small amount of detail, but we like to get that right. Apologies for that. 10 years ago, the mining industry was trying to reconcile this concept of sustainable development with the ongoing objectives of its business. At the same time, it was trying to counteract the growing wave of negativity that was surrounding the industry. 10 years on, we are now looking at integrating sustainability in all its forms into all aspects of our business. And in fact, we're now starting to explain why mining is in fact relevant, which is something I suppose as mining executives we took as a given. But it seems today, with the growing concern about mining, the impact that mining has, we've paused and reflected. We feel it's important now to explain why in fact mining is important for society in general. So when I say that we've now looked at incorporating sustainability in all its forms into our business model, what does that mean? It means that if mines are going to operate into the future over the next 10 or 20 years, safety and health, environmental stewardship are going to be absolute givens. They're not going to be things we strive for. They're going to be prerequisites for mining to continue. Now, 20 years ago, when we built mines in remote places, we didn't even consider something called the local communities around those operations. Today, you can see the impact of that. Rosia, Montana in Romania remains unbuilt after 25 years. Esquel in Argentina remains unbuilt after 20 years. Tia Maria in Peru remains unbuilt. Minas Conga in Peru cannot be built. Even though governments in those countries would like those operations to be built, they are powerless to actually make it happen because local communities feel that they weren't properly consulted, they weren't included in the decision. That is the big change that we see going forward, is that the industry is going to have to be a lot more transparent about what it's doing. It's going to have to include those people affected by the operation that they seek to build. It's going to have to show the benefits of that project, and it's going to have to show that society in general believes we should have that mine built in that particular area. I certainly don't see this as a doomsday scenario at all. In fact, it's a wonderful opportunity for us as an industry to do the right thing. And of course, the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do you share the cake that is created? We have to remember that providers of capital provide huge sums of money in a very capital-intensive industry, with long paybacks and significant risks against the vagaries of the commodity markets. They have to be rewarded for putting their capital up, because without their capital, there would be no mining operation. Governments in the host countries in which the mines are built have to see a benefit as a wasting resource is being mined. It's not like an industrial concern that can go on forever. We know that mining is finite. The resource in the ground is finite. So governments justifiably want to receive a fair proportion of the benefits. The communities around the operations want to see that there is some local development, that their kids, their children, can be employed and trained by the operation, that multiplier effects can take place, and that businesses can spring up as a consequence of the operation. We have a wonderful case study that you can look at on our website about how we built a mine 4,000 meters up in the Andes in northern Peru. And these were the key ingredients for us as a company successfully building a mine in a region called Cajamarca, which is probably one of the most volatile parts of Peru. And yet, because of an all-inclusive approach up front, before any earthworks were done, before any soil was disturbed, there was a 2-year consultation process with communities, and they gave their support to that operation. Someone said this morning in another conference that's going on the other side of town that if we're going to do sustainability properly, a lot of companies are going to go out of business because of the cost of doing it. I don't necessarily see it that way. I think if we can collaborate together and we can work out a fair distribution of the benefits, then everyone can benefit from mining. And I'm also a great believer that if you don't have a win-win situation in mining, it in itself is not sustainable. Governments need to provide 3 things: a regulatory framework for mining to operate and the rules of the game to be clear and consistent. They need to provide the infrastructure necessary for mining to take place, either solely or in partnership with business. And lastly, they need to keep law and order. In terms of getting community support for projects, that's up to us. That's up to business to make sure that happens. And I believe that if we go into this in a positive way, then mining will be relevant in the future and it will get the support of society in general. Any alternative to that is not a sustainable solution. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nick. Our last speaker is Ashok Khosla, who many know as president of IUCN, but he's also chairman of Development Alternatives, which is a pioneer of social enterprise in India. And he's built this social enterprise up from something quite small to, in effect, a leading business of a type that works at scale that I think actually covers some of Pavan's DNA, aligning with societal goals, a capital factory, I think you've got out there. It's a community, an institute of learning. Maybe you don't pay taxes, but you use them. Anyway, Ashok, over to you. I think we have a PowerPoint.
I do have a PowerPoint.
Oh, you need this, don't you?
Can I borrow that? Thank you. There are companies and there are companies. There are big companies, there are billion-dollar companies, hundreds of billion-dollar companies, and there are smaller companies that actually do a lot of big stuff. Pavan was right that the private sector creates large numbers of jobs and products and services and, of course, taxes. But it's very small. For the big companies create very little compared with the smaller ones. In my country, for example, as well as in Germany and in America, a very large part of the economy is by the small and medium enterprises. 80% of the jobs are created by SMEs, a large part of the production of OEMs and products and services and exports come from small and medium enterprises. So it's not just the big. I'd like to share with you something really at the other end. It's not what you hear about in newspapers and books about micro-enterprise. That's sort of restricted to household companies. But what I would call mini-enterprise, something that is bigger than micro but smaller than small. My own organization, my companies are, my 2 colleagues are here, are social enterprises. They were set up about 30 years ago, as Steve says, more or less from scratch. And now they are among the largest social enterprises in the world. Of course, we can't compare with the Catholic Church, but for sustainable development, we are a company, a business that makes large amounts of impacts in the market. So what I'd like to show you very quickly is a story of my DNA, which is very similar to the one that Pavan was talking about, but in an area that most people don't think about as business. We heard this morning a lot about planetary boundaries. Well, I came to the conclusion that while the Stockholm Environment Institute was quite right in identifying the 9 big planetary boundaries, they'd forgotten completely the 9 societal boundaries, the issues of poverty, hunger, unemployment, illiteracy, alienation. And so, in addition to what we heard this morning, my company set out 30 years ago to try and deal with the problems of that woman in that picture. I showed this picture a couple of days ago here in another meeting, and I just want to remind you that this woman there has virtually never seen anything that has been produced by a big company of any kind. And probably in her lifetime she never will if we continue the way we are. Nor those people living in this favela. Most of them have access to soap and toothpaste and maybe cigarettes and a few other things, but not much comes from the big economy into their lives. Planetary boundaries, on the other hand, have also given us a lot of food for thought, and here you see 2 of them: climate change, endangered species, and a variety of other things. And I'm going to talk very quickly about 2 types of businesses, 2 DNAs, which must merge together. This first DNA is the delivering of solutions to some 3 billion people who have less than $3 a day to spend. They need, particularly their women, need things like cook stoves and toilets and water systems. I'm afraid my remote goes every 3 times. Cooking, solar cooking, cheap houses, jobs, cloths, textiles, and so on. The type 2 DNA has to deliver solutions that save the planet, things like light bulbs that are low energy, refrigerators, solar energy, wind energy, and so on. Now, we've got to change track, and we've got to do it fast, and we've got to do it on a large scale. And that needs innovation, and it needs multiplication. And that can actually benefit from the market. So the story, the lesson of what I would like my story to get across is that we're not against the market. It's a different kind of market that we need. And the people in it, the corporate leaders, must see their way to corporate heaven, a staircase that consists of essentially starting maybe with telling everybody how good they are, to complying with the laws, to going beyond compliance, and then to maybe philanthropy. But the top level, the one that takes you to Paradiso, is social enterprise. It's an enterprise that basically does well by doing good. Everybody does well by doing well. That's the corporations. A lot of people do good by doing well, and that's philanthropy and foundations and so on. Some people do good by doing good, like churches and voluntary organizations, NGOs, but the real top level of paradise is the social enterprise. And there are several types, and I'm just quickly going to give you 1 or 2 examples of each. There is the enabling corporation, like a franchising corporation. If McDonald's were selling cook stoves and toilets and water systems, they would have discovered the ultimate way to help local enterprises deliver products and services to the local market. So these are the kinds of things my organization's been doing. This is a handmade recycling paper unit where we create 25 jobs for women, poor women. The poorest women in my country come and work here. They produce all kinds of products and services that we can sell, not only in India but overseas, but our primary interest is in the local market. If I can get this thing working. This is a man who's working for this enterprise that makes unfired bricks, saving huge amounts of energy. Now, then there is a second model, which we call the partnership model. We have a big project in which we've convinced the cell phone operators in India, who are huge, because everybody has a cell phone, just like in Brazil, and they have to use large amounts of energy for their telecom, their base stations, their towers. that energy costs them a huge amount because they have to use diesel because they're far away from the electrical grid. Now, we've been able to discover ways in which we can greatly reduce the cost of that using renewable energy, supply that energy to the station, and at the same time get the station to pay the capital costs for a larger station, which then gives, at very subsidized, cross-subsidized rates, electricity to the local community. So this is a win-win situation. The corporation gets it cheaper, the community gets it, and it's a partnership that creates a whole new way of delivering energy to large numbers of people. We have a company called Desi Power, Decentralized Energy Systems India, which creates electricity and sells it at a commercially viable rate to the local communities through new technologies that we have developed. We develop wastelands, deserts into forests, if this can go. And then there's the third type, which is the Robin Hood. Now, that woman that I showed you earns literally $1 or $2 a day. There is no way she can pay the full cost of many of the services she needs. We, for example, have a service to teach her how to read and write. We can teach her how to read and write with a computerized model, which at a total cost of $95. But she doesn't have $95. So in this one, we go, it's very rare, but then here we do not have a viable product at a rate that the end client can afford, then we get it from somebody else, either government or a corporation or corporate social responsibility funds or whatever. We in essence raise a scholarship for her from somebody who can afford it and thereby deliver a product that she can't afford. This is the lady, and this is the method, and it works like a dream. It's a magic formula for teaching someone how to read and write in 30 days. In fact, 29 days. That's basically the kind of thing that we do. I do have a few other things which I